Renaming column headers and pullers is a very common task. In any given data pipeline, you may need to format the columns with certain case conventions or make the column names more user-friendly. We'll walk through various ways that you can rename columns within a puller's data frame. A quick note here is that I saved the very best column renaming methods for last, so if you only want to learn those methods, you can skip to the end. That said, some of these other methods may be valuable to know in certain circumstances, so it's definitely worth sticking around. We're going to be in total today learning 5 different methods for renaming the columns, so we'll go ahead and jump into that shortly. Now, before we do, I highly recommend checking out the Pullers Code Academy repo on GitHub. We share all of the Jupyter Notebooks and resources that we use here in our videos, and we do this to provide you with an easier learning experience. So if you want to follow along, go ahead and download those notebooks from the Pullers Code Academy repo today. I'll include a link to that in the video description. Also, if you're looking for a more comprehensive learning experience, I invite you to check out the Pullers Power Pack. Now, the Pullers Power Pack is a collection of Jupyter Notebooks designed to give you a comprehensive view on how to solve some of the most complex data problems out there using the Pullers lightning-fast Pullers library. You can use code PCA20 at checkout to get an additional 20% off your purchase and accelerate your Pullers learning today. Okay, let's dive in, and first thing we want to do is establish a baseline. And so we're going to do a read CSV function. We're going to bring in our employees CSV file that we're using in this video. And we just want to know what our column headers look like, what kind of case conventions they have. So let's go ahead and run this. Okay, so as you can see, we're using basically the headers have lowercase letters, and then there's underscores where spaces might be, or just to kind of separate those, multi-word headers that you have there. So this is the format. This is what we're going to be working on today. And we're going to start renaming columns, and we're going to do it in 2 different types of sections. So the first section is renaming the columns after you import them. Okay, and then the second is renaming when you import them. So we'll kind of walk through both. And again, I feel like the better methods are done when you do it on import. But again, it's not always the case where you can do that, right? Sometimes you need to rename the columns after you import them. So we're going to dive into that right now. Okay, so the first method that we'll use here is using a list. And so this one is very simple. You're basically just going to manually set the columns by doing data.column, and then you're going to pass in a list. And this list is going to replace what is currently the column headers that are in the current data frame. So, and this method, not many methods in Pullers are done in place. This one is. So when you type out this code and do this, this will replace it permanently. Unless you go back and redo it, right? So, and we'll walk through that, but we're going to go ahead and run this now. We're going to name it ABC, and obviously this isn't a great practice. You shouldn't be naming your columns like this. It's, if you see this in your database or in your data pipeline, you probably roll your eyes. But this is just illustrating that you can use a list to overwrite the existing column names on this data. Right? So we basically just took this data, overwrote the column names using a list. Okay, now we're going to use the rename function. So this function is actually one that the Pullers team put together specifically for renaming, and it uses a mapping method. So what you have here is the rename function, and you can see it says up here that you can use a map. So basically, in this case, the map is going to be a dictionary. And the dictionary is going to be key value pairs. Basically, the key is going to be the existing column names. So because we named everything ABC, we're going to have to go back and manually input, in this case, or via this dictionary, manually change these column headers using this rename function. One quick note I will say here is that on the list side, it's important what order you have when you are renaming the columns, because it just goes sequentially. When you use the mapping function, you can actually specify what columns need to be changed and where. So it doesn't matter in this case if for whatever reason B was first or D was up top, it would know exactly which one to map it to because it's obviously a mapping, right? So that might go without saying, but this is where I would maybe recommend using this method over this one up here. And again, there's a couple different reasons for that. So let's go ahead and run this data now. Okay, so you can see that we've successfully overwritten our column headers. Now, I do want to just check here. Now, we did use the rename function, so potentially, and my guess here is that this is not done in place like this one is, right? So if I was to type data here and run this, you can see that I now have ABC, and you might be thinking, well, what's going on there? And again, it's because this method that we use, this function, does not replace the column headers in place like this one did, right? So that's another thing to keep in mind. If you are using this one, you'll probably have to declare a new variable. Maybe you type data and overwrite that variable. Maybe you change it to something else so that you don't get confused. But that's another thing to consider here. I'm just going to go ahead and delete that. And now we can move on to other naming functions where we rename on import, right? So again, these are the better methods. I would highly recommend, if you can, doing the rename on the import so that you have the correct operations and it's a little bit cleaner, right? You don't have to do as much remapping and naming after the fact. So let's go ahead and dive into some of those. Let's go ahead and expand this here. And so we have 3 more methods to work through. The first one is going to be using the new columns parameter. So let's go ahead and expand that here. Now you can see we are once again using the read CSV function, and we're going to attempt to rename these on import. And in this method, this parameter, new columns, we can pass a list of headers. And so kind of similar to the list that we had before, we can do that here on the import. And once again, you have this this list that you can overwrite with the existing overwrite the existing column headers. So let's go ahead, and I'm just going to import this data, and we'll print it out. So you can see everything got renamed to basically what we passed in here. Now the one exception is, and I did this on purpose so that we could show you this. The salary column, which was the last column in the sequence, is still sporting the existing original column headers. And that's because we left it off here. So if we wanted to change that, we could come in here and type salary. And that will, when we reread it in here, it should fix that last column there. So there you go. So that is the first method. And again, that's a much better method than the first list method that we showed you, but there is an even better way. So we're going to talk about using a schema. So to do this one, we're going to use the Polars extensions library. Now this is a library that I developed in order to save these schemas that, there's Polars schemas that exist on every data frame. I created it so that you could save those schemas and then reuse them if needed in a data pipeline, right? So what we have here is a schema.json file. I did save this beforehand, so this is this file up here. You can see that it basically is just a JSON file with key value pairs. It's got the column names here and then what their data types should be. So you can see we got a little bit of fun going on here where we're doing a little bit of wacky column naming conventions. But let's go ahead and click back over here and kind of walk through this. So the Polars extensions library, once again, it allows you to read and write schemas, so you can save the schema and then reuse it. Since I already have the schema saved, we just need to read it back into our interpreter here. So let's go ahead and run this. And what we get back here is a Polars schema object that we can then utilize later on. So we're going to utilize this immediately in using the schema parameter. Now I probably should have named it something different so there's no confusion here. This schema variable is coming from here, and then this is actually the parameter that we're going to be using. So it's fairly straightforward, and what it should do is overwrite those existing column names. So let's go ahead and run this. Okay, so in the output, we once again get our new column names, and that's a great method for renaming column names as well. Probably one of the better ones, I would say. Now, the last method we're going to talk about is using DataFramely. And we did just cover DataFramely in our last video. I mentioned that I had fallen in love with this package in that it really does a good job of validating your data. And so it actually has really useful capabilities here as well. And so we're going to kind of talk through some of those. So once again, we're going to be using the schema parameter, but this time we're going to have DataFramely be the driver of that. So it's likely that you already may need to have some sort of data frame validation using this kind of maybe model. And so if you have something where you need to test data against anyway, you're already building a DataFramely model, it might make sense to just also use that to ensure that the column names are working properly. And so we're going to go ahead and kind of walk through that here. So we're creating the class, and nothing special here. We're just giving it what the class column names should be. And then what we're doing is we're actually going to call the model, and then we're going to call this puller's schema function off of it. And what this will do is give us, similar to how puller's extensions did, it's going to give us a schema that we can work with and utilize later on. So I'm going to go ahead and run this. And you can see that we now have our new DataFramely schema variable, and it looks very similar to our last one. Obviously, we have some better names here, but very similar, works in a similar way, and we can use it down here as well. So let's go ahead and do that. We're going to go ahead and run this code. And once again, we have successfully overwritten the existing column names. All right, so there are so many ways that you can rename columns in pullers, and we've given you some of the best ways to do that here. Once again, I highly recommend using the schema to do that, because then you can systematically and easily change everything there. Thank you for watching, and we'll catch up with you in the next video.